Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dynasty Slant from PFF Fantasy. This is Scott Spratt. That's Michael Moore. This is the place to be if you want to hear Michael's and my thoughts on Dynasty and Keeper Leagues. Michael, last week was the first time we've recorded a podcast together, and I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years. And, nothing totally disastrous happened, so I'm pretty pleased about that. Do you have any thoughts on how we can maybe avoid a sophomore show curse?
Well, I think, not really. I mean, I think you just jump right in. But I do have a question for you, Scott.
Oh, hit me with it.
Both of our teams were on byes this week, Carolina and the 49ers. So my question is, what did you do? Did you watch something else? Did you maybe go outside for the first time in a while? What did you do?
I have way too fair a skin to go outside, Michael, so that was a non-starter. I watched the Ravens game, and let me tell you, it was an offensive explosion in that one. Definitely worth my time.
You poor guy. That's too bad.
I had a good time. How about you?
Well, I definitely watched they're 12 o'clock games here because I'm in the central time zones. But after that, I definitely got started on my Lifetime Christmas movie season and watched a very good movie about a lady that owns a bookstore that ran into a guy. And would you know it, they fell in love, and it was Christmas time.
See, that's interesting. We're going to have to go to war on this because I'm a Hallmark Christmas movie man, and you're apparently a Lifetime Christmas movie man. Okay. So we're going to have to discuss that more. But first, let's get started with some actual fantasy football talk.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, my God, it's picked up!
Topic 6.
All right, there's a lot we want to cover on today's show. So let's start with, Michael, what I thought was the most interesting topic that you came up with, which is, what do you think the Vikings offense is going to look like in 2018 and beyond? And I didn't know do you want me to just start by talking about like which players are under contract and which aren't long-term for them? Or how do you think we should even start this conversation?
Yeah, do that because I have an interesting juxtaposition to all that. So go ahead and name all the players that they have now and will have.
So I think the reason we sort of came up with this in the first place is because we talked about Adam Thielen last week and how good he's been, and Diggs is obviously another really great receiving option. So there's a lot of stuff going on in their offense. But at quarterback, it's a really weird situation. You have Case Keenum right now, who's been very productive in fantasy so far this season, but is weirdly in kind of a quarterback controversy right now with Teddy Bridgewater, who is just finally back and healthy after missing the last, I think, 2 years. Is that right, Michael? Has he played since 2015?
He injured his leg in the preseason of 2016.
Okay,
so
right.
More than a year, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you have Keenum, Bridgewater, and then Sam Bradford is also still on this roster. Well, as of next season, I'm pretty confident that Keenum and Bradford are both going to be free agents, unrestricted. And Bridgewater is in the last year of his rookie deal as well. The Vikings already declined his fifth-year option before the year even started. So I think from the quarterback perspective, everybody comes off the books next year, and the Vikings will have flexibility to do what they want to do. Does that sound right to you?
It does.
Okay. Then at running back, this is almost as fascinating because Dalvin Cook is the rookie that was very productive for the first 6 or 7 games before he went out with an injury. He's on his 4-year rookie deal. But then you have Jerick McKinnon, who is filled in quite well for him as one of the 2 running backs they've been using. He's an impending free agent. And then Latavius Murray, who had the big week last week, he has an option the Vikings can pick up for $5.15 million if they want to, or they could let him walk and become a free agent. So a lot of flexibility for the Vikings next year that could lead to a lot of different scenarios. Let's discuss them right now, Michael. How do you think this shakes out for the team next season and beyond?
Well, and I thought this was interesting because just to compare going into 2016 and 2017, the Vikings of 2016 were going to roll with Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback, Adrian Peterson at running back.
Right.
You might recall Charles Johnson was still on the Vikings and a quasi-breakout candidate there.
I did not recall that, but good call. That's right, yes.
They drafted Laquan Treadwell in the first round. I mean, that just gives you an idea of how quickly, I guess, things change, whether it's real life or fantasy. But to answer your question, with quarterback, it's tough because it's almost like a plug-and-play kind of deal. No matter who they throw out there, obviously they're going to produce if they have a strong running game and obviously a really good defense, of which they have. So going into next year, I think I would personally, how I see it shaping up is keeping one of Keenum or Bradford, right?
Okay.
Because they can't keep all 3, obviously. I think Bridgewater comes back. I don't think he's going to request a lot of money on the open market. I think he probably doesn't play again this season. I think Keenum's probably playing too well. So I think they could probably bring back Bridgewater and Keenum relatively cheaply compared to a Sam Bradford, who I think would probably get a higher deal somewhere. So I personally think they're going to go with two of these guys going into next year and have a little competition in the preseason. What do you think?
I think that makes some sense. It's actually kind of eerie how similar these players have performed. And for anybody that's just kind of looking at fantasy production and wondering why Keenum is in a controversy in the first place, I think fantasy is overrating how good he is relative to what he's really been doing on the field. That's something you can see in his PFF grade, where he's 18th at the position and trailing guys like Andy Dalton, Eli Manning, Jameis Winston. So it's not like he's been lighting it up in real life. Maybe he has in fantasy. But I kind of pulled some stats here just to show how similar these guys have been. And since 2014, Keenum has an overall 7.3 yards per attempt. Bradford has 7.2, and Bridgewater has 7.2. So there you go. These guys are all the same guy. But really, they aren't. And it's because there's sort of stylistic differences here. Bridgewater has been very effective with throws behind the line and on short passes 10 yards or shorter, whereas Keenum and Bradford have been more effective in the middle of the field and going deep. And in particular, I feel like that is a better fit for the roster. Thielen and Diggs both have pretty high average depths of targets, 11.2 and 13.7 yards. That makes them 28th and 14th among the 60 qualifiers. So I feel like because of just they've sort of stumbled into these really good receivers that are really good deep threats, it's backward, but I feel like they're going to want to pick a quarterback that is better suited to make them explosive players down the field. So I'm leaning Keenum, and I agree that Bradford and Keenum probably are going to be too expensive to keep together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and another note on that, not only is their ADOT, Thielen and Diggs pretty high, they're also first and second in deep passing catch rate.
Yes.
Meaning they are the best at catching deep balls this year, 1 and 2. So I agree. If you've got one of those quarterbacks that is especially adept at throwing it deep or even, a medium range, I think they got to use that and they got to utilize that, which, look, Keenum, he got a bad rap, obviously, going into Minnesota because he came from the Rams, but luckily he was freed from the Jeff Fisher shackles and he, was able to at least be, I think, competent in Minnesota.
Yeah, and this is another one of those situations where Keenum doesn't have to do everything himself. They've got a great defense. They have a good running game, which we're about to talk about. Keenum can just be back there making good decisions, throwing the ball deep for some big plays, and they can be a very competitive team, if not competing for Super Bowls. So, I don't think they need to reinvent the wheel here.
Right.
For Bradford, I could really see him end up on a team that wants to draft a young quarterback and just use him as a bridge, given that you probably can't feel confident in having Bradford for multiple years anyway. He seems like the right kind of guy for that.
Having him in multiple games, Scott.
Sad but true. Man, he was so good in week 1 this year, too.
He really was.
No, super disappointing. Okay, Michael, tell me what you think about the running back situation.
Well, to me, there's only really one guy that's assured of coming back next year, and that'd be Dalvin Cook.
Right.
But even then, he tore his ACL kind of, almost to the halfway point of the season. So it's not even a guarantee he's going to be ready to go at the beginning of next season.
That's true.
Obviously, Jerick McKinnon's a free agent. You've got Latavius Murray, who they brought in, who, while they did sign him to a multi-year deal, as we all know with NFL contracts, most of those aren't guaranteed, and that's the same with Murray. So they could cut him next year or let him go and not pay his $5 million or so salary. So, with the way that running back deals go these days, meaning how cheap they are, I would guess that they would keep McKinnon, some, fairly reasonable deal for them money-wise, and probably cut Murray. I don't think they need all three. I think they would agree with that, but they definitely have to have some veteran presence behind Cook in the event that, the rehab doesn't go well or that he's not even ready for the beginning of the season. So I would go with Cook and McKinnon at this point. What about you?
I agree with you. And I think it's going to be cost prohibitive for them to keep both because, as mentioned, McKinnon's a free agent. He's played well this season, so I think he's going to command a little bit of money. And the reason they were able to get Murray is because that was a pretty favorable deal that he was looking to sign to sort of break out. And he has contract escalators that are going to make him more expensive next season. So I feel like they're going to have to pick. And I think they're going to pick McKinnon because I think he's a better complement for Cook, being the better receiving back and the better pass blocking back. He just fits in better with what they're doing with the team. They can afford McKinnon and Cook because Cook is, again, on that rookie salary, which is pretty inexpensive. I just don't think all three. So I would bet Murray leaves, and I think they're going to keep Cook. And McKinnon and Cook, at least whenever he's back and healthy, whether that's week 1 or week 5, he'll probably be a running back too.
Right. And look, like you said, McKinnon's played well this year. So even if, you draft Cook pretty high next year, whether it's redraft or, a dynasty startup where you trade for him, if you've got McKinnon as sort of your safety valve, then I think you'll be just fine.
Yeah, he'll probably be one of the better handcuffs in the league. So I agree with you. I think that all makes sense. All right, let's move on to topic number 2. And this one, it's depressing to me as a Panthers fan, but where do you think Alvin Kamara fits in among your dynasty running back rankings? Let me guess it's high. We're bringing this up because he had another great week last week. 8 carries for 42 yards, 6 catches for 74 yards and a touchdown. His was the touchdown that I think brought them back to the tying for the Redskins in their 15-point comeback win. He's been amazing this season. He's the number 7 back in standard scoring, number 5 back in PPR scoring. How do you see him stacking up to other dynasty options?
Because it's only been half a season, I'm hesitant to declare him, sort of a low-end running back 1, at least when it comes to my dynasty team. But look, at the very least, I think running back 2 is reasonable, especially with a PPR league, obviously. As you mentioned, he just is extremely productive this year. He's extremely efficient. And, he's averaging 12 touches a game so far, and 7 of those are catches. So if you've got him in a PPR league, look, that's 7 points right there. Even in a half-point PPR, you've got a few points just from catches, not counting his yardage and not counting any touchdowns he scores. So with his youth and the fact that they sort of clear the deck with that Peterson trade, and look, we don't know what's going to happen with Mark Ingram after this season. I think he's set up pretty nicely for that.
I'm glad you brought up Ingram because this is a really interesting aside that I was investigating this coming into the show, and I was kind of surprised by what I found. Ingram is under contract with the team in 2018, but he has an opt-out clause that becomes vested if he makes the All-Pro team this season. That would give him the ability to void the contract and I think make a lot more money. I had a kind of hard time figuring out exactly how this plays out, but as best I can tell, there are between 1 and 3 running backs that can make the All-Pro team in a year. And they've kind of changed the rules about the voting for this because now there's like a flex player that guys can vote either a running back or receiver or a tight end to make it. So I don't know. I know last year Ezekiel Elliott and Jay Ajayi were all pros. I feel like Ingram could make this all-pro team and could become a free agent because of that. Does that seem plausible to you?
Oh, completely. Especially with the way the Saints offense is humming now. And I've got some numbers on that too that we'll get to. But between that and really, the elite running backs that are usually at the top, either getting injured or suspended in Elliott's case. I mean, it creates a clear path for Ingram to finish at the top this year. So, no, that's entirely possible.
I don't think if Ingram stays, it really hurts Kamara very much at all anyway. But I will say that Kamara is 5'10 and 214 pounds. That's not huge, but it's big. It's bigger than a lot of the receiving backs we tend to talk about on this show. So I think it could hold up to 15 to 20 touches a game if half of those are going to be targets. I'm pretty optimistic about him.
Yeah, I think so too. And something I found interesting, the Saints have kind of done a 180 this year when it comes to their play calling. We're used to them being pass first and Drew Brees throwing it, 40 times a game. And they actually, clear back to their Super Bowl season in 2009, averaged 40 pass attempts a game. But in that 2009 season, I don't know if you knew this, they actually passed the ball only 34 attempts per game and ran it a lot more than they usually do, or at least a lot more than we're used to. Well, they're doing that again this year. They've completely turned it over to the run game between Ingram and between Kamara. And look, I think that's probably boosting, obviously, Ingram's value. It's obviously boosting Kamara's value. And I think the more that they stick to this sort of balanced approach that they're having, I think his value is going to stay right where it is right now, as long as they keep to it. It's really just a question of, do they keep at this after this season, right? Because they did this in 2009. They won the Super Bowl that year. I don't know if you know this, but Mike Bell led the team in rush attempts that year.
Nice.
172.
Throwback.
But Pierre Thomas, who I know a lot of us remember, was not that far behind at 147. And then Reggie Bush was not that far behind at 70. So not only did they run it a lot more, they had a pretty balanced approach too. So I agree with you. My point is I agree that even if Ingram stays, I think both him and Kamara still have pretty good standalone value.
All right. I think I agree with you. Let's do an exercise to try to nail this down as best we can in the podcast format. I have pulled George Kritkos's Dynasty rankings from our site. I pulled his because his were the most recently updated about a month ago. And at that point, he had Kamara as the number 17 back. I'm sure he and everybody else on the site would have him higher ranked among Dynasty running backs if they did it today. So let's try to just go through the guys he had in front of Kamara and see if you would jump him over anybody else.
Okay.
I kind of broke these guys down into 4 classifications. There's the list of guys here that I think are definitely more valuable than Kamara, and that is Le'Veon Bell, Ezekiel Elliott, David Johnson, Todd Gurley, Leonard Fournette, Kareem Hunt, and Melvin Gordon. Do you agree with all of those, or do you have any that you're not as sure about?
No, I agree with all that. And really it comes down to the fact that they just see a lot more carries than Kamara does. I think he's at 48 for this year, which is about 5 per game he's averaging. And all those guys you mentioned are capable of 20 to 25 carries or are on teams that give them 20 to 25 carries a game. So, No, I agree. I would take all of those guys over Kamara.
All right, the next class, we have Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, and Dalvin Cook. I call these guys sort of unproven backs with big potential. Would you take any or all of those guys ahead of Kamara or not?
I think I would take Kamara over all of those guys, quite honestly.
Interesting.
I think he's in an offense and in a role that is a lot more defined than any of those guys. I think McCaffrey is probably – I think the Panthers, and you can back me up on this, is what they Kamara is what they wish McCaffrey would be, I think, at this point.
Yeah. I mean, McCaffrey was good the last couple of weeks, but Kamara is, I think, clearly a better player than he is in a similar kind of way.
Right. You've got Derrick Henry who, until they once and for all sort that situation out with him and DeMarco Murray, I can't really trust him consistently. Joe Mixon's kind of struggled a little bit lately. And then Dalvin Cook, who was pretty explosive when he was on the field, just got done tearing his ACL.
Yeah.
So going forward, I would be much more comfortable with Kamara than those guys.
All right, 4 more veterans, Devontae Freeman, LaShawn McCoy, Jordan Howard, and Ty Montgomery. Which or if any of those guys would you have Kamara over?
The 2 that I would have pretty even with him would be Freeman and would be Howard for me.
Yeah,
and
they're
it goes
on the
back,
younger side. Yeah, that's helpful.
Well, younger, and it goes back to what I liked about the first group of guys, which is I know Freeman and Howard are capable of seeing a lot of carries.
Yes,
which ensures a lot more touches than hoping that he can fulfill his catch quota, if you will. So. Freeman and Howard, I would put on par with him. McCoy, I think, if we're talking this season, I would put McCoy ahead of Kamara. But, man, after this season, McCoy's going to be 30 or close to it. And I don't know if I trust that going forward. And Montgomery, I don't know.
Aaron Jones is better than him. He just is.
I've never been a Montgomery fan, personally. I just haven't. I mean, between the health and the fact that they don't seem to want to turn the keys completely over to him, I personally am not a fan of him going forward.
Then I looked below Kamara in the Dynasty rankings to see if there was anybody else I could pull out of there. Not really. I mean, Ingram, Carlos Hyde, is any of that doing anything for you over Kamara or not?
Not really. I mean, with Ingram, do I think Ingram's going to get, if he stays in New Orleans, will he get more carries than Kamara? Yes, but at the same time, Kamara's catches completely balance that out or cancel that out. It's not like the Saints are ever going to give one running back 25 carries a game consistently. I think we can agree on that.
By my accounting, I think that means Kamara is the number 10 Dynasty back, unless there's going to be rookie backs next year that pass him, which we'll get to that in the offseason. But, man, that guy is super valuable. So congrats to everybody that has him in Dynasty. And, maybe make a trade. If people aren't ready to accept him as being that highly ranked, I agree with you that he should be.
Do you have him in any leagues at this point, Scott?
I do.
Did you draft him or did you trade for him?
So it was a year 1 draft for a new Dynasty league that I'm in, and I kind of went with the strategy of paying for some really established elite wide receivers and then got 10 running backs, most of which were rookies, and just kind of read with that as a strategy. And it's working pretty well so far. And Kamara is he's my best running back, even though I only paid $8 of a whatever budget for him. So yeah, it's nice. I'm glad that I have him on my team, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah, I have him in one of my dynasty teams, and to be honest, I didn't draft him. Not that I didn't like him coming out, but I didn't draft him. But I have a team that is certainly rebuilding. I have no shot at the championship this year.
Yeah.
And I had actually Jay Ajayi, and somebody had approached me about Ajayi, and this was before the trade to Philadelphia, but somebody had approached me for him and offered, I think it was Kamara and George Kittle.
Okay.
The tight end, which it's a standard scoring for tight end league, so nothing special there, and a third rounder, all for Ajayi. And I thought, I'm not completely sold on Ajayi, and that seems like a decent return for him, so I'm going to go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
Thank God I did, because Kamara has completely blown away most other running backs, like we talked about. So
I mean, I would have thought that would have worked out eventually, but it's already paying dividends for you this year. So
yeah, pretty much.
Great.
And it's completely screwing up my rebuilding plan, but I digress.
You're like the Jets of fantasy football, just winning games
Right.
when you should be tanking. But what can you do? Okay, let's move on to topic number 3. I thought this was a fun one that you suggested. Is Kenny Stills finally breaking out? So this comes on the heels of another huge performance. I think what did he have, 180 yards and a touchdown this week?
Yep.
So one of the top receivers of the week. For the season, he's up to 33 catches, 408 yards, and 4 touchdowns, which makes him the number 15 wide receiver in standard scoring. So I guess I'll just pose the question back to you, Michael. Do you think he's breaking out finally?
I think so. And look, he's one of those guys that I know has shown flashes before. And, I think we always thought he was on the verge of a breakout, but he's, seemingly finally doing it now. And the reason I wanted to bring him up, especially for dynasty leagues, is I think he's probably set up to do even better next year. He's going to be in Miami still. He signed a pretty decent extension before this season started. But this Jarvis Landry thing in Miami, he's not going to be there. If he were going to be there, they would have re-signed him already, and I just don't see him coming back, which leaves a big hole as far as targets go for a guy like Stills. And really the only other established receiver that's going to be there next year is Devontae Parker. And I think, whatever Adam Gase cooks up will be plenty to feed Parker and Stills with Landry out of the way. So that's why I wanted to bring him up is, this year, obviously, he's having a good season. Like you mentioned, he's up to 588 yards on 40 catches this season.
Yeah, my bad. I clearly missed a week. Thank you.
Well, I think, it may just not have included yesterday, which
I think that
was a huge day.
Yeah.
He's got 5 touchdowns already on the season. He had 9 last year. I mean, he was a pretty decent threat last year. But I wanted to talk about him because, so far he's done pretty well just being, just working in that offense and being fairly efficient. For example, according to our own PFF stats, he's currently, I don't know if you knew this, 5th in PFF's wide receiver rating, which means that quarterbacks are doing very well when they throw to him. He's also 2nd in deep catch rate, something we touched on a little earlier with Thielen and Diggs. He's catching 47% of targets thrown to him that are more than 20 yards. So, it's not like it's garbage time, and it's not like it's a fluke that he's doing well. He's actually, being fairly efficient compared to past seasons. What do you think about him?
Yeah, he's always been an effective deep target. His 13.9 yard average depth of target is very normal this season. And yeah, those big plays, you're definitely expecting him. I was actually shocked to see that he's 25 years old. I would have said like 28. It feels like he's been around forever, but I think he was so young when he entered the league at first that it wouldn't be that weird for him to be breaking out at this point. That said, I do have a couple of reservations. The first is, one of the reasons I feel like we're noticing Stills' performance is because the sort of second tier of wide receivers in fantasy is just non-existent this year. And these stats may not be updated for this week either, but the number 3 wide receiver in standard scoring is A.J. Green with 109 fantasy points, and the number 30 guy is Paul Richardson at 76. So that's just a 33-point difference. It seems like you have your really top guys, your Hopkins, your Antonio Browns of the world, and then it's just a bunch of guys. Stills is definitely among those bunches of guys, but I don't know. I feel like if next year kind of bounces back to the way things had been, there's definitely going to be a clear tier of guys in front of him before I would even consider him in a league. My second reservation is kind of the quarterback situation in Miami. In a lot of ways, you could say this has been something that's hurt Stills, having to yo-yo between all of these different guys. But I do think that Matt Moore is the best fit for Stills' skill set, especially with the deep balls. Moore tries more passes deep and has more yards per attempt on medium and deep throws than either Tannehill or Cutler. Tannehill's deep accuracy has long been a problem for him, but it seems like he's had the most success with more behind center. In fact, 3 of his 4 games where he's seen at least 8 targets have come with more playing. So I'm not sure if this is something that's going to keep up with Tannehill when he comes back next year, maybe, or whatever they do at quarterback next year. I just wonder whether he and Moore have a good chemistry that isn't something that's going to be fantasy relevant in the long term. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think it's important, as you mentioned, to sort of, just realize what I guess the expectations were. Meaning, he's having a very good year. Like you said, it's some of it to do with the fact that some other receivers are injured and not playing too. Much like the running back situation. You got Beckham, who's been out for a large period of time. You've got a lot of other receivers that have missed a lot of time that sort of pushed these not lower, but I guess tier 3-ish guys up like Stills. So, but I think I'm more looking forward to next year when it seems like there'll be a more or better opportunity, I should say. And look, that's a pretty good segue to what we're going to talk about next with the quarterback situation, because I don't know that Miami has a quarterback on the roster right now that's going to be playing for them next year.
Well, they certainly made the cut for this next question for me, which is, where does Kirk Cousins play in 2018, and does that help or hurt his fantasy stock? So Cousins had another really effective fantasy day. He actually, I thought, played really well overall. He took some major hits and got the ball out and did a good job. But obviously they blew that game to the Saints. That team is probably going to be eliminated from the playoffs, if not now, then within the next couple of weeks. So, we've sort of seen all the things that have happened with this situation, with all the franchise tags and everything else. At this point, Cousins is going to be a free agent next year, and I'm wondering where he's going to play. And Michael, by my count, 21 teams have a clear incumbent where they won't be looking at a new quarterback, but there are 11 that don't. So let me at least bring those up quickly before I get your thoughts on where you think he's going to play. 1, Arizona Cardinals. Carson Palmer could retire. 2, Buffalo Bills. There's rumors that they could be looking to trade Tyrod Taylor. Obviously, you saw that circus this week. Who knows what they're going to do? Number 3, the Cincinnati Bengals. They can opt out of Andy Dalton's contract, and that would only cost them $2.3 million next year, so that may be something they want to do. Then you've got 4, Cleveland Browns. They'll have a top pick, but they need a quarterback, obviously. 5, Denver Broncos. 6, the Jaguars, Blake Bortles. He has a $19 million team option. I can't imagine they'll pick that up. Number 7, Miami Dolphins. They could cut Tannehill, and that would just be a $4.6 million cap hit, so they could move on there if they want to. Vikings, we mentioned all of their guys are going to be free agents next year, is number 8. The Giants, they have a top pick, and Eli, he can't really be cut prior to 2019 without major financial issues. So maybe they're not really 1, but I'm calling them 9. The Jets, 10, and then the Redskins themselves being 11. I think those are the teams that could realistically make a play at Cousins. Where do you think he's going to go?
If I had to nail one down, I would probably go Arizona, quite honestly. I think of those teams that you mentioned, well, I would say Arizona or Denver. I think you've got to look at a team that is ready to win now and has sort of mature veterans on their roster. And Arizona, for me, would be perfect. They just re-signed Larry Fitzgerald to a 1-year extension, so that tells me they're not ready to blow it up just yet. They'll have David Johnson back next year, obviously, and they still have a good defense. They're just missing, really, a quarterback that can stay upright. And look, no matter what your opinion on Cousins, at least he stayed healthy the last couple of years that he's been the starter.
Hey, I think he's a good player. So if I were these teams, I would love to have him. With the Cardinals, they actually have some cap problems. And obviously, if Palmer retires, that frees like $20 million for them, so they could afford Cousins. But if I'm Cousins, I'm wondering, yeah, maybe that'll work in 2018, but what's the long-term plan of the team? They've been sort of hemorrhaging good players, especially on defense in recent seasons. And they probably can't afford to keep the core together that kind of took them deep in the playoffs a couple of years ago. Why not the Jaguars then? I mean, that's a team that's going to free up some cap space if they lose Bortles. They'll easily be able to afford him, and we're seeing that they have a young defense that's kind of on the rise. Maybe their offensive weapons aren't tremendous, but Fournette seems really good. I feel like they're a younger version of the Cardinals, and that might be a more appealing spot for Cousins, at least from a play perspective.
Yeah, it would. My only question for you on that would be, Jacksonville's made it a point to really run the ball more. I mean, they drafted Fournette. They've just, tried to limit obviously the times that Bortles has the ball in his hands. So I guess my only question would be, do you think they would alter their approach next season with Cousins? Because, look, you've got Kirk Cousins. You're going to let it rip, or at least you have a better chance to succeed doing that than you did with Blake Bortles. So do you think they would pass him more, or do you think they would sign him to be sort of that game manager type?
I'll answer your question with a question, which is, do you think Drew Brees is upset that he's not throwing the ball as much this year, or do you think he wants to win games?
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Okay.
So that's where I'm leaning. I could see the Redskins happening again. The Broncos, I could definitely see that happening too.
You know what? I think Denver is going to be. I mean, that's a top 3 option for me for him. I think you've got, you've got John Elway, who, let's face it, of the 3 quarterbacks on the roster, he's 0 for 3. I think we're going to agree on that. And in one case, he's 0 for 2 on the same player, in Brock Osweiler. So he needs a solution fast. And look, it worked with Peyton Manning to sign a veteran that he knew he could plug in and work. I think he probably goes back to that well. I think he's probably not going to want to wait for a draft pick to develop. He's not going to want to, sign a Tyrod Taylor who, is not, I guess, an elite option like Peyton Manning was back in the day. He wants somebody he knows can get the ball in the receiver's hands. He's got good receivers. He's got a good offense and defense. He just is missing that one piece.
While we're speaking about Denver, let's make a little shift here to talk about our 5th question, which is, with Brock Osweiler underwhelming, should Dynasty owners start to care about Paxton Lynch? So Osweiler, he's lost both of the games that he started this season. He's at a 52% completion percentage, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and a very low 6 yards per attempt, which is pretty much where he was last year with Houston, which we know how that turned out. Lynch, I don't know. Do you think that we should start caring about him in Dynasty leagues?
No.
No? Not at all?
That's my well. Look, to your point, and you had mentioned this on some of the pre-show notes that you had mentioned.
Yeah,
we've gone this far in his career, nearly 2 seasons now,
26 games. Yeah,
and he has yet to sniff the field. They brought back Brock Osweiler. That's how bad Paxton Lynch was. He wasn't even close to just throwing him out there. And you had Trevor Siemian, who, I think fooled all of us maybe that first month or so, but he finally came back down to earth. And apparently that wasn't even enough to throw Lynch out there. They had to bring Osweiler back. So for me, I can't imagine that Lynch is anyone to monitor, especially since most Dynasty leagues, at least that I'm a part of and that you probably are part of, are only 1 quarterback. I can't see Lynch not only starting but developing it into a top 12 option. So I don't know. I think Elway completely starts over next year at the position between free agency. Maybe he does pick a guy high in the draft to go with a guy he signs in free agency, but I can't imagine Lynch being the guy there this year or next year.
Yeah, this isn't exactly Aaron Rodgers sitting while Brett Favre sort of finishes his career.
No, Trevor Siemian won't be confused for Brett Favre anytime soon.
I don't even think this is Carson Palmer sitting for John Kitna. If that happened, that could just be made up in my mind. But I feel like Palmer sat for a year or two as well before he took over. So it's definitely not a good sign. Let me make my sort of weak attempt at saying why Lynch might be somewhat useful in fantasy. His junior year in college, his last year at Memphis, completed 66.8% of his passes. That's not bad. That's pretty much the mark of guys like Jameis Winston and Cam Newton, who are relatively inaccurate by NFL standards, but are effective quarterbacks. You've got Lynch, 245 pounds, is a big guy. He rushed for 17 touchdowns in 3 seasons in college. I could see Lynch being like a Tim Tebow-like fantasy player, where all of a sudden he's like suddenly giving you top 10 quarterback performances in a couple of weeks, and you're like, what's happening here? Should I be starting this guy? But then he'll be replaced in real life, even if he's effective in fantasy, because his fantasy production is not a reflection of how good he is as a player. And that's kind of what I feel like Lynch could be doing, which maybe that means pick him up if you need a quarterback, but don't expect him to be a long-term solution for you, I guess is where I've ended up with that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this year I think is pretty shot. I mean, it's possible he sees the field this year, but going into 2018, I don't know that he would be on my shopping list.
All right, so let's ask you another question. Player that could be on your shopping list. I'm not sure. Ricky Seals-Jones. Here's a name that I literally had no idea who this guy was, but then suddenly he gets 54 yards and 2 touchdowns on his 5 targets this week for Arizona. So I don't know. Is this a guy that we should care about, Michael?
I I have a hard time saying yes, only, and not necessarily because of the player. I mean, I think, he's got the ability. It all has to do with the team he's on. Arizona, specifically under Bruce Arians, just doesn't use the tight end at all. I went back and looked. The top 2 tight ends for the Cardinals got 80 targets last year.
Yeah.
They got 60 targets in 2015 and 70 targets in 2014. So if you just, cut it down the middle, that's about 70 targets for their top 2 options a season, which that's just not enough to be fantasy relevant, especially when you've got this very good rookie class we have this season of tight ends between Ingram, even Kittle to a lesser degree. And look, even Adam Shaheen for the Bears had a good day yesterday. So, I think he had a good game. I think we have to take Arizona's game yesterday with a grain of salt. You had Blaine Gabbert at quarterback. You didn't have David Johnson, obviously, who's still out with that wrist injury. So it was like a bizarro version of the Cardinals, and I just lump in Seals Jones with that bizarro version, not the real life version. What about you?
Okay, here's another half-hearted attempt why you could maybe care.
Okay.
So Seals Jones, he's a rookie tight end out of Texas A&M. The thing that I really like about him is, one, his size, 6'5", 245 pounds. He's kind of the ideal size that you're looking for from a receiving tight end. And he was a former 5-star recruit, and injuries might have had a lot to do with the fact that he had pretty mediocre production in college. All the scouting reports that I've read about him say that, hey, he looks great, but he just doesn't have the speed or quickness to separate. And he has what we in the business call Eric Ebron hands. He drops more than 10% of his passes in college. Not what you're looking for, obviously. But I feel like the guys that sometimes come out of nowhere to be like, hey, this guy was totally undrafted and suddenly he's a great player, those guys tend to be former 5-star recruits that for whatever reason, things just didn't work out for when they were in college. So give me a deep dynasty league, maybe I will care. But I think I'd rather have Rico Gathers. I think I'd rather have Jake Butt. So I think we're talking about pretty deep leagues here at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for example, I'm in a couple leagues that have 55-man rosters. I mean, it's IDP. It's not all offense.
Right.
So would he be a taxi squad candidate for those types of leagues and roster makeups? Sure. I mean, I think, you get anyone that is at least second string at any position, but yeah, it's just that role. It's just that team that he's on isn't real conducive to fantasy tight ends. But going back to something you briefly mentioned, I do want to credit you with the Eric Ebron call, because when you and I did this podcast many years ago, you had said that Ebron was not going to amount to, I guess, the hype that he had being a top 10 pick. And sure enough, he hasn't. He has been, mediocre at best. And I will always remember that about you, Scott, that you were the first one to say Eric Ebron, not good.
Yeah, poor stone hands. I watched him drop too many passes in college, and I don't even watch a lot of college football, but he did play for my alma mater, North Carolina. So it's sad that it hasn't worked out. If anyone
would have known about it, it would have been you.
Yeah, sad that it didn't work out, but I can't say I'm surprised.
Right.
All right, Michael, we've agreed too much, so let's do some gunpoint banner.
Guys.
Gunpoint banter.
Okay, things got pretty heated last week. I think we could be in for another one because, Michael, you wanted to ask which currently elite wide receiver will not be an elite fantasy option in 2018. This could be an argument into of itself, but here are the wide receivers that we've sort of established as being elite right now. Antonio Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Julio Jones, AJ Green, Odell Beckham, Mike Evans, T.Y. Hilton, Adam Thielen, Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Thomas, Brandon Cooks, Doug Baldwin, and Keenan Allen. So, Michael, why don't you get us started? Who do you think of those guys is not going to be elite next year?
Well, Scott, I went with Michael Thomas of the Saints, and it kind of is due to something we touched on earlier, which is really the role reversal of the Saints offense, where they went from this very pass-heavy team, 40 pass attempts a game, to a lot more balanced, quite honestly. They're just middle of the pack now when it comes to pass attempts. And for a guy like Thomas, who is not, necessarily a deep ball threat like Brandon Cooks was in that offense and still is with the Patriots, Thomas is definitely a more volume guy. Like, for example, he's not even breaking 12 yards of reception this season. He's got, I think, one 100-yard game and only 2 touchdowns. And look, he's still going to be the number one receiver for the Saints, but if they're going to be running it a lot more, he's not going to be in the elite company that an Odell Beckham or Mike Evans is, that I think we thought Thomas might be. What do you think?
Maybe Kamara's their number one receiver, and that's only halfway a joke. I mean, seriously. That's a good pick. I like that. I am probably biased because this guy completely smoked me in several leagues this week, but let me take my frustrations out on Keenan Allen. Allen, the thing that stands out to me the most is that he has a 12.5% drop rate this year. That's the third highest in football behind Amari Cooper and Marquise Lee. And given that his 9.6-yard average depth of throw is kind of low, it's kind of what Fitzgerald's is, really. I don't feel like his difficulty of catch is super high, so it's a little alarming to me that his drop rate is where it is. Couple that with some of the other concerns you have. I mean, obviously, injuries have been a problem for Allen throughout his career. You have Mike Williams, the rookie wide receiver that they drafted high that could be on the upswing. You have Phillip Rivers at quarterback who's older and could be on the downswing. There are a lot of little things that could chip away at his value in the future that I didn't really want to pick any of these guys, and I was definitely too cowardly to go with Antonio Brown, who I considered. But Allen is the one that has the most red flags in my mind. So if I have to pick one, I'll pick him.
Is it going to be bad if we agree on this too, Scott? Because we do.
But we don't agree on stash of the week, so let's do that.
I'm telling you, these shares are hot. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. It's definitely a good idea. Dwayne, I get it. Now, can you get me? Have I ever lied to you? That's right. And ask around. I never do, Dwayne.
Stash of the week.
I considered permanently retiring this segment after Michael got my boy Curtis Samuel immediately hurt after he selected him last week, but maybe we'll try it for one more week and hope that things go a little bit better. So, Michael, give us started.
Yeah, I was going to say, if my guy gets hurt again, then we're definitely retiring this segment.
All right, give us your guy.
So my guy this week is going to be receiver Mack Hollins from the Eagles. Not really known right now, doesn't have a real big part of the offense in Philadelphia, but you know, he was he was a favorite of the Devy community going into this season. Not really heralded, really a real under the radar guy, like you had mentioned in our notes. He played at North Carolina, but you know, it's not like he saw a lot of volume there, so he didn't get a lot of attention going into the draft. But he did score a lot of touchdowns there. His PPR points per opportunity this season is about 0.8, which is pretty high, even though he's only seen 11 targets this season.
Yeah.
But the reason why he's a stash for me is really any receiver on the Eagles looks really good right now. But next year, you've got Alshon Jeffrey, who signed a one-year kind of prove-it deal with Philadelphia. So it's hard to say if he'll be back or if he'll be too expensive for them. You've got Torrey Smith, who can easily be cut after this season. They can actually save a pretty good amount of money if they do cut him, and he'll be 29 going into next season. You've got Nelson Aguilar, who, yes, he's had a mini comeback this season, but he's only got 1 year left on his rookie deal in 2018. So, you know, the path is pretty open for Hollins to earn a lot more playing time going into next season. And obviously Carson Wentz is just lights out, and there's no reason to think he won't continue to be lights out, at least for the foreseeable future. So I'm going to go with Mack Hollins as my stash.
I like that. I feel like one of the reasons Hollins wasn't a bigger deal in college is because the Tar Heels had a lot of receivers on their team, including like Ryan Switzer, who's now like a punt returner in the league for the Cowboys. A lot of those guys were very effective college players, but didn't have the physical tools to really make it at the next level. I mean, obviously Switzer is good at what he does, but he's not going to be somebody on the outside at the NFL level. And Hollins does have those physical tools. And now that he's facing NFL defenses, I feel like he's the kind of guy that could have a better pro career than he had a college career. So I do like that pick. For my stash of the week, I'm going to go with another Panther, Cameron Artis Payne. So this was pretty much the first time he got any work. The Monday before today, so about a week ago when the Panthers played against the Dolphins, or was that 2 weeks ago? Whatever, doesn't matter. Artis Payne ran for seven carries for 68 yards, and it was really the first time that I ever thought I saw an NFL back when he was running. And the Panthers' offense could be in a little bit of flux. Jonathan Stewart is under contract for one more season after this one, but he hasn't really provided a lot as a runner over the last 2 seasons. I do think he's still a good pass protector, but the offense is moving away from him as he gets older. I think that if I had to guess, the Panthers are going to end up having a power back that isn't on the roster to start the 2019 season, back when Stewart won't be on the team. But, you know, I'm uncertain enough, and I liked enough of what I saw from Artis Payne last week that I'm willing to stash him and see how this goes over the next year or so, or sooner if things don't work out for Stewart or whatever the case may be. I think he could be a nice bigger back to pair with McCaffrey. Not nearly as good a situation as the Saints normally have, but the Panthers' offense is one that can support 2 running backs, I think, if McCaffrey is really doing the bulk of his work in the passing game. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think, not to take anything away from Jonathan Stewart, who has had, quite honestly, kind of he's had a decent season. I'm not going to say a great season. He's got 460 yards, 1 touchdown. Okay, it's actually been worse than I thought. But my point is, I think him and a guy like Artis Payne are not all that dissimilar, and I think Artis Payne is significantly cheaper than Stewart. So I could definitely see, even as soon as 2018, them cutting Stewart, saving the money, and just having Artis Payne as sort of the bigger back role while they maybe turn over more to McCaffrey.
Yeah, I do think with Stewart's contract, so he restructured entering this season, which I think pushed some of his guarantees into next season. So I'm not sure how realistic it'll be for them to cut him next season, but there's really no financial constraints with him, with Artis Payne being as inexpensive as he is. So I feel like if he's the better player, he'll start playing more, and I can finally sort of see that potentially happening. So I'll stash and find out. I'm willing to give that a shot. All right, Michael, I think that pretty much does it for this week with the Dynasty Slant. Thanks for everybody that's been listening and hopefully subscribing. I mentioned this last week, but we are part of the PFF Fantasy Specialty Podcasts. That includes the IDP shows that are come out on Wednesdays and the DFS shows that come out on Thursdays. We'll be out Tuesdays most weeks throughout the rest of the season and then throughout the offseason. So thanks again for listening. For Michael, this is Scott. We'll catch you next week.